Okay, I'm ready to start, but I do seriously mean that jokes are almost as important as this because we should have fun. I think that the key about this movement, the Austrianism, libertarianism, is have fun first, and the rest is, you know, also important. Okay, today I'm going to talk about environmentalism, and I'm hoping to cover the following subjects: air pollution, hazardous wastes, plastic versus paper, forests, species extinction, oil spills, greenhouse effect, ozone layer, and overpopulation. So that sort of covers the waterfront, so to speak, in environmentalism. And let's see how far I get through all of that. Okay, the first topic is air pollution. And I want to recommend to you the Murray Rothbard article on air pollution, which appeared first in the Cato Journal, and then it appeared in a book that I wrote when I was at the Fraser Institute that I edited. And it is, in my view, the best article written in environmental economics. So if you start with anything, if you have any interest in this field, that would be a good place to start. Okay, what's the deal on air pollution? In the view of the mainstream, and here Arthur Pigou, P-I-G-O-U, is a mainstream economist who started all this, and most books on environmental economics would follow this. And here's a quote from him: "Smoke in large towns, which inflicts a heavy loss on the community, comes about because there is no way to force private polluters to bear the social cost of their operations." Now, this business of social cost is of interest because the way the mainstream economists would illustrate it, they would say, here is supply and demand, and here is the actual amount of quantity that will be produced in the marketplace. However, this supply curve, which is based on cost, the way the Marshallian scissors works, supply is based on cost, demand is based on utility, this doesn't take into account all the full costs of the operation. Say you're making steel or you're making blackboards or whatever it is. Here is a quote from your friend and mine, Samuelson, who says that the manufacturer pays for things like wages, rent, insurance, interest, raw materials, marketing, transportation. There's one thing he doesn't pay for, and that's the smoke that permeates onto other people's property. Why not? Well, it's market failure. One summer, I didn't have anything to write about, so I grabbed a whole bunch of American economic reviews, like 10 of them. And I was thumbing through them with the idea of writing critical remarks. And it seems that each one has come up with a new market failure. Market failures that you never even heard about. It's sort of the way to get published in the AER is to come up with a new market failure. So I was having fun criticizing them. Well, in any case, when you take into account the full costs, including the smoke that the market doesn't take into account, then the cost curve shifts upward. And here would be the optimal amount of production. This is the actual amount, so you can see that we're producing too much stuff that you have external diseconomies on, or negative externalities, right? Anyone who's had micro has been familiarized with this sort of a thing. And how do we solve it? Well, the Pigou thing was to tax these guys so that the true costs are taken into account, and we move from the actual to the optimal. Then there's the tradable emissions rights scheme, various Chicagoite mainstream kinds of schemes to correct this market failure. But the key is that it's market failure. Okay, here is Oscar Lange and Fred Taylor, socialists, who say, a feature which distinguishes a socialist economy from one based on private enterprise is the comprehensiveness of the items entering into the socialist price system. In other words, yes, everything enters the private system does include some costs, but not all costs. And the great socialist economic system includes all costs. This is problematic, and what I'm now going to talk about I get from Tom DiLorenzo's magnificent book that he wrote for that Washington group. I forget what it's called, a little mini book. Wonderful little thing. And what it says, what Tom says, is that if it were really true that the socialist economy takes into account all costs and the capitalist one doesn't, then say what you will about the failures of socialism in terms of producing, toilet paper and wristwatches, but at least their environment ought to be good. And then Tom goes in and examines their environment, and he finds out that the Aral and the Caspian Seas are disappearing due to pollution, overcutting, desertification, creeping deserts. The Volga River, it's illegal to smoke on a boat because if you throw the cigarette butt outside onto the river catches on fire because there's so much pollutants there. Chernobyl was only the tip of the iceberg. There was little or no waste treatment in Poland. The gold roof in Krakow Sigismund Chapel dissolved due to acid rain. Sulfur dioxide concentrations in Czechoslovakia were 8 times higher than in the U.S. This is in the 80s under the wonderful communist system. There was a brown haze over East Germany. Then he goes into the idea that if there's market failure, then at least government, you'd think, would be fine on environmentalism. And then he goes into an analysis of what the U.S. government is doing. And the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, so-called defense, some of us think of it as the Department of Offense, but we won't get into that. What they did is they just dispersed 400,000 tons of hazardous wastes. The Rocky Mountain Arsenal dumped nerve gas, mustard shells, anti-crop spray TX, incendiary devices. Then there's the TVA, 59 coal-fired plants. Then there was the Yellowstone Park forest fire, which creates pollution. It's interesting that most of these forest fires come in government-owned land and private forests don't. It's probably just a coincidence, that if you own it, you take care of it, and if you're the government, you don't. I wouldn't attribute anything about private property as an explanation, but some weirdos might, but I'm a moderate on this question. So it's not really a market failure is what I'm trying to say here. It's a government failure. Let's get into this a little more deeply. And here I get back into the Rothbard analysis, who bases his analysis on a guy named Horowitz. This is a legal historical analysis. Horowitz is a Harvard historian who's pretty good on this one question. And what Horowitz and Rothbard tell us is that in the 1830s, there was a spate of environmental cases. And what would happen would be typically some little old lady would go to court and say, that there factory is polluting my washing. I hang up my washing, it's wet and clean, and I come back and 2 hours later, it's dry and dirty. And I want 2 things out of the court. I want an injunction to get them to stop it, and I want damages. Or a farmer would go to court and say, I put my haystacks out here, and that there horseless carriage railroad came along with sparks all over the place and set on my haystacks on fire. These were environmental plaintiffs. And typically in the 1830s, the courts were very receptive to this. They would say, yes, private property rights uber alles, private property rights are important, and the factory and the railroad and the manufacturers are trespassing soot or sparks onto other people's property and into their lungs, and this is a violation of private property rights. This country is based on private property rights, and they would pretty much grant injunctions, namely a court order to cease and desist, and also make them pay for damages. So now you can see that under such a legal regime, there would be no bifurcation between full costs and partial costs. Now, the manufacturers and the railroads and all those types of people would have to take into account all the costs, not just the costs for labor or the costs for insurance or interest or what have you, but all the costs. So the reason that they don't have to take into account all the costs later on was not due to a market failure. It was due to the fact that the government didn't uphold private property rights. So it's not a case of market failure. It's a case of government failure to do with what it says it's supposed to be doing, namely upholding private property rights. Okay, in the 1830s and the 1850s, you had very good effects that came about as a result of this. First of all, they had to take into account all their costs. Secondly, there was a thing called forensic environmentalism, or environmental forensics. Now, we all know what forensics is. You watch the CSI, and they're forever talking about blood and semen and hair particles and stuff under your fingernails. Why? Because we have laws against murder and rape, and in order to figure out who murdered or who raped, we have to analyze these things, and that's forensics. So what's environmental forensics? Environmental forensics is you take this little bit of dust and you say, well, where did this come from? Aha, it came from that factory. Well, let's go put those guys in jail. Or let's, give them fines or whatever it is. So you had environmental forensics. You also had a incentive to have research and development in stopping pollutants, smoke prevention devices, technology, and this is in the 1830s and 1840s, long before we really got going, industrialized, and this is long before computers and all that. People would actually invest in R&D, research and development, to stop polluting. Why? Because they had to pay for it, so they might as well keep that junk to themselves, and the smokestacks would try to capture the pollutants before they got onto other people's property. You get scrubbers. You would also have an incentive to use more expensive but cleaner burning anthracite coal rather than cheaper but dirtier burning sulfur coal, right? Because the sulfur coal would get off everywhere and it would burn dirty, and you'd have to pay for it with a lawsuit. So you might as well spend a little bit more money, buy the anthracite coal, which burned very cleanly, and then you would have no external effects, no market failure, so to speak. And if you had a moral businessman, say you had a Christian or a Jew or any moral businessman who said that, well, I don't want to be polluting other people, he would then not have any competitive disadvantage because everyone else would have to do the same thing. Okay, that's the 1830s to the 1850s. Then you had the so-called progressive period. The progressive period was the 1890s, 1900, 1910, maybe 1880s. I'm not really a historian, so don't hold me to it, but it came later, 50 years later or so. And during the progressive period, a new philosophy overtook the law. As you can see, this analysis is really a legal analysis of environmentalism, at least when it comes to air pollution. And during the progressive period, who was number one? Who was the big shot worldwide on the world stage? Great Britain. Great Britain had the biggest armies and the navies and the manufacturing base. And we wanted to be number one. Sort of like the NBA finals, we're number one, all those sports things. So a new legal philosophy permeated the court system in the United States. And the next time some little old lady or farmer or victim of industrialization came to the court had a very different kind of an analysis. Let me just stop here and say that in the 1830s there were some cases that didn't uphold property rights, and in the progressive period there were some cases that did. But I'm just sort of giving you an overall assessment. Namely, that in the earlier period, most of the cases upheld private property rights. In the later period, very few did. Most of them denigrated property rights. So what the court would now say to the environmental plaintiff would be, yes, of course, they violated your private property rights. Your stinking, sniveling, dirty, selfish private property rights. There's something more important than those kinds of individualist property rights, and that's called, and you have a little drum roll, the public good. And what does the public good consist of? The public good consists of the U.S. being number one. And how is the U.S. going to be number one if it listens to every little old lady worrying about her laundry on the line and doesn't take the side of the manufacturer? So they took the side of the manufacturer, and they would not grant injunctions. They would not grant damages. What they did give one sop to the plaintiffs, and they said, okay, look, we'll have minimum smokestack height regulations. So in the old days, the smokestack was, 20, 30, 40 feet. Now you had to make it 200 feet high. So yes, that smokestack over there, half a mile away, wouldn't be polluting this old lady, because it would be so high, it would go into the clouds and would go all over the place. So now it's very hard to tell, where this stuff was coming from, nor did it even matter where it came from because there were no legal penalties anymore. So all of a sudden, did it pay to use the clean-burning anthracite coal, which came from the West and not from the East? No. I'm trying to hint that there was political machinations here too. Rather, you now had an incentive to use sulfur coal, which came from Pennsylvania, and the Pennsylvania senators and Congress critters were, more powerful or what have you. So that was part of the story. Was there any sense in having research and development to stop pollution? No. Was there any sense in having environmental forensics? No. So you had a very different kind of a legal milieu, and of course you had pollution all over the place. So there's this wonderful quote Murray Rothbard has in his article where he quotes some guy, a judge in 1910, I think it was called the Athens Empire laundry case, where a laundry was suing somebody, and the judge said, look, just because they're ruining your laundry doesn't matter. It was really blatant, a horrible quote from a judge. So what happened from about 1890 to about 1950, 1960 was chaos, anarchy. No, I don't mean that. Chaos. No private property rights. I remember in the 60s, maybe in the 70s, I once went to a lecture in Los Angeles. I lived in New York, and I got outside, and my eyes started to tear. I wasn't particularly unhappy, but the pollution was different in LA than in New York, and I was used to the New York pollution, and it took me a little while to get used to the LA pollution. So my eyes were tearing. I remember around this time there was a wonderful cartoon in the New Yorker magazine. There was a mother and a daughter eating in an outside restaurant, outdoor restaurant, and you'd think the mother would say to the daughter, hurry up, dear, eat your soup before it gets cold. Instead, what the mother said was, hurry up, dear, eat your soup before it gets dirty. The air was just horrible. People were going around in gas masks, and now you have the rise of the environmental movement saying, oh, this is horrible, look at what capitalism has done, you dirty rat. Look at that T-shirt this guy's got, enjoy capitalism. This is the evil stuff which creates pollution all over the place. Obviously, what I'm saying is that it's not capitalism, but rather the lack of capitalism, because capitalism is predicated on private property rights. So in the 1960s, 1970s, you had this reaction against industry, and people were saying, we have to stamp down on these capitalists because they have no consideration for other people's property rights. And it's true, capitalism has no consideration when the law doesn't make them. Now if you have a moral business person, what would happen if he said, well, look, I don't care what the other people do. I'm a Bible believing person. I don't believe in trespassing my soot particles. I'm going to use anthracite coal. I'm going to engage in research and development so that my chimney doesn't spew forth stuff onto other people. What would happen to such a person? Such a person would go broke. So what happens to the Adam Smith invisible hand? Well, the Adam Smith invisible hand doesn't work. The Adam Smith's invisible hand is supposed to lead people to do that which is in the public good. Here the invisible hand is broken. It's leading people to do that which is not in the public good, to pollute each other. But of course we can see that the reason for this has got nothing to do with capitalism. It's got to do with the fact that the government refuses to uphold the law. First it takes a monopoly position in this, and then it refuses to uphold the law. Okay, enough on air pollution. Let me next get into, let me talk a little bit about noise pollution and also the issue of coming to the nuisance and homesteading. Suppose the first guy that got there, Pittsburgh, the first guy that got to Pittsburgh had a steel mill, and he was spewing forth pollution. So his area was, say, 100 acres, and he had a low smokestack, so the pollution was in an area, say, of 1 square mile. And now I come here, and I put in a house. And now I sue them in the 1830s, and I say, hey, you're polluting me. Am I right or am I wrong according to libertarian legal code? I'm wrong. Because this guy homesteaded this area for his steel mill, but he also homesteaded the, let me not call it pollution because it's no longer pollution, the disposal rights of dust particles in the whole square mile. You get where I'm coming from? So I would be in the wrong if I set up my house here and said he should stop it. He has the right to do it. Let me try another example. The same example, but I'll use a different case. Here is an airport. I started in an airport. I'm the first one there. I put an airport out in the boonies. And here is my airport. It's 1 square mile. But the noise, now these dots are no longer pollutants, but they are noise waves. The noise permeates, say, 10 square miles. And now you dirty rat, come here and put in a house and sue me and tell me to stop my airplane. Right? You would be in the wrong. So the libertarian legal analysis of pollution or noise waves is not a mechanical or chemical analysis. Rather, it's a legal analysis. Who was there first? And this is called coming to the nuisance. But apart from that, then the analysis that I mentioned holds true. Okay, the next subject that I want to get into is the issue of hazardous wastes. And the way I'm going to illustrate this is with the paper versus plastic issue. So what's going on with paper versus plastic? Well, the environmentalists, does anyone know where the erase? Thank you. For the environmentalists, paper is wonderful. It's biodegradable. You put it in the earth and it sort of falls apart and then becomes part of the earth. It's just wonderful stuff. On the other hand, plastic is evil. It's an abomination. It comes straight from hell. It's, it's hazardous. It'll cause cancer. It's just horrible stuff. And here is another market failure. Because let's do a little analysis here. Here we have paper. Here we have plastic. Here are the costs. And I'm going to give you 2 scenarios. The first scenario is you're in the supermarket checking out counter line. And in this supermarket, some supermarkets actually do this. They'll charge you for the paper or the plastic. Many times they'll give it to you for free, but sometimes they'll charge you a penny or a nickel per bag. And you ring up your groceries, $80, and now they ask you the inevitable question, paper or plastic? And we're going to go through an analysis of the incentives that you have to use for either paper or plastic. Well, what is the cost of paper? Cost of a paper bag is a penny. What's the cost of a plastic bag? Cost of a plastic bag is a penny. Is the market helping us solve this environmental problem? No, say the left-wing environmentalists or the market critic, the invisible hand is not working, it's not helping us. The only reason we now have to use the good paper and eschew the bad plastic is benevolence. But we all know what Adam Smith said about benevolence. It's not from benevolence that the butcher and the baker and the candlestick maker give us their products. Rather, it's out of a keen appreciation of their own self-interest. So the only thing that we've got going for us is benevolence, and benevolence is a weak reed. We can't rely on human benevolence. Yes, within the family and Mother Teresa, but the average person is interested in number one, and the whole, I won't say the whole, but one of the attractive parts of capitalism is that it mobilizes selfishness in good directions. That's the invisible hand of Adam Smith. People are led through a consideration of their own self-interest to do that which is in the good of the community. But it's not working here. Why isn't it working? Well, the reason it's not working is because the costs are such that you have no incentive to go one way or the other. There's another cost, though, of paper and plastic, and that's the cost of disposal. What's the cost of disposal of paper or plastic? Well, the way disposal works in most places is we have not nationalization, but municipalization of garbage disposal. In most places, who's in charge of garbage dumps? The good old government. And, you know, when I mention government, you're supposed to boo or, you know, something like that. Boo, boo. Well, that's it. Okay. What good students. Okay. So what's happening is you'll pay taxes, $100, $200, $500. You'll pay a certain fixed fee to dispose your garbage, and then they take your garbage away. Nowadays, they make you sort it out, but that's a whole other problem, which we'll get into in a few minutes. Is there any difference between the paper and the plastic? No, it's zero for this and zero for that, so the total costs are a penny versus a penny, and that's it. I don't know if I should put 0, 0. Maybe I should put $200 each, but the thing is, I put the same thing there because they don't differentiate when you dispose of it. Okay, so that's the extant situation where nothing much is happening of a good sort. Now let's suppose that instead of municipalizing, socializing the garbage disposal, what you had was capitalism or free enterprise in the garbage disposal industry. Namely, what I'm saying is that the cause of the problem is not market failure. The cause of the problem is government failure. Government gets involved and it messes up the calculations. Let's see how it would work now. Okay, so we're going to keep assuming that the left-wing environmentalists, or the watermelons, you know, green on the outside, red on the inside, that they're correct, and that the cost of disposing of paper is just a penny, because paper is good and, you know, it's biodegradable and all that. What's the cost of disposing of plastic? Plastic is horrible. Let's suppose it's $5. I'm just picking these numbers for illustration purposes. Okay, so those are the costs of disposing it. What will the price tend to be? Okay, Simon, you own a garbage dump, and I want to put in a plastic bag in your garbage dump. You know that if I do it, you're never going to be able to turn this garbage dump into a golf course because, you know, people will get sick playing golf there. You'll never be able to put housing on it. And that's what they do with garbage dumps sometimes. In New York City, they had this place, Rockaway Parkway, something. It used to be, no, Canarsie. It used to be a garbage dump, and now there are high-rises and people living in there. But you know that if you put a plastic bag in there, it'll cost you $5. So what are you going to tend to charge me for that?
At least $5.
At least $5. $100 if you could. But if he charges $100, what'll you charge?
Maybe 99.
That's it, 99. Good capitalist pig. No one's going right down to $5 right away, but the next one, 98, 97. Eventually, the market will, you know, get you down to $5. Because in equilibrium, which we never reach, but we always tend toward, there are zero profits. So if I tell you that the true costs of doing it are $5, the price will tend to be $5. And anyone charging $4, $3, or $2, or $1 to put that in his garbage dump, what will happen to him? He'll lose money, he'll go broke. Okay. So now let's get back to the first scenario. We're now in free enterprise. We're now under capitalism. There are no more municipalized garbage dumps. Everything is private. You go to the same supermarket checking out counter line, and they say, do you want paper or do you want plastic? And you know that if you take the plastic, the total cost for you will be $5.01, whereas if you take the paper, it'll be 2 cents. Is there anyone in this room who doubts that the whole problem would then go away? That now, thanks to the magic of the marketplace, not only would benevolence be on the side of paper, but so would self-interest be on the side of paper. Because now it costs you $5.01 versus 2 cents. These numbers are made up, but they give you the general drift of what it is. And now the market is working. Why is the market working? Because the government hasn't socialized a big part of the market. Why did we have, quote, market failure before? Not because there's anything wrong with the market, but because the market wasn't allowed to operate. When the market is allowed to operate, we have no problems. Does this mean that there'll be no plastic bags used in the free market system? No. It only means that the only times you'll use a plastic bag in the free market system is when it's worth 501 or more than 501. What kind of plastic bags? Well, that's stuff that they drip into your arm in a hospital. You know, those kind of plastic bags. They'll still use them, but it's important that we use them, but it's pernicious. That's not the right word. It's silly. It's uneconomical to use a plastic bag to wrap garbage under the assumption that plastic is so horrible.
In your example, the plastic is more expensive to dispose of, but sometimes, you know, the better way to do things is more expensive. What about in situations like that? How would it, you know, to properly dispose something so that it's good for an institution,
Oh, yeah.
it's more expensive?
Well, I'm not against using it. I'm saying that when it's worthwhile using it, then the market will use it. And I'm giving you an example of when it would be worthwhile to use a plastic bag in cases of medical plastic bags or when it's really important. But now we're doing it frivolously. We're using it to wrap garbage, which is silly because we don't have market prices. And this is just another example of the socialist calculation debate applied to environmentalism, right? We need prices that reflect the true scarcities. Yes, sir?
In Canada, certain supermarkets charge for paper and plastic, and what people do is they bring their own box to bring their supermarket commodities.
Well, you're anticipating me a little bit. You see, so far I'm operating on these assumptions. Now there's this guy Rathje, William Rathje, who is a garbologist. A garbologist is to garbage as an archaeologist is to ancient ruins.
Architecture.
I'm sorry?
Architecture.
Architecture, okay. Sorry. Stand corrected. Most of us see a big mound of garbage and go, ooh, yuck, you know, you back away. A garbologist sees a mound of garbage and goes, oh, whoop-de-doo, you know, let me get in there and analyze it. Well, Rathje, can you imagine two ladies talking, oh, my son's a doctor, what's your son? A garbologist. Well, anyway, Rathje is a garbologist, and what he does is he analyzes garbage. And according to him, plastic is inert. It's not hazardous. It's no big deal. The real big deal is telephone books, because they sort of release methane gas or something. Now look, I don't know from this. I'm no garbologist. I've been called many things, but never a garbologist. So I don't know. But I've been just assuming that these numbers are correct. It might be that, you know, this should be a penny and this should be 2 cents. And maybe the market should be indifferent to them. Now here's where we get to Canada or some of these People's Republics of Santa Monica or, you know, Ann Arbor or Cambridge, Massachusetts, where they're really rabid on this, and they force you to, what do you call it, separate your garbage out so you can recycle it. Well, you see, recycling too comes from markets. We recycle cars. We recycle houses. No one throws away a house after they use it. You know, you sell used houses. We don't recycle tissue paper. We recycle gold, but we don't recycle rubber bands, right? The market determines whether you recycle or not. It's a market decision, and the decision is made. The more valuable the thing is, the more it is worthwhile for people to spend their precious human energy to do the recycling. The market determines these things, but not in Canada and these various people's republics. There, they force you to do it. I have a summer house in Vancouver, and you have to separate it into plastic, paper, bottles, and something else. And guess what? They have 4 different garbage trucks that come by. It's the most amazing thing. Spending all sorts of money on garbage instead of, you know, just picking it up unrecycled. People, you can trust people to recycle gold and diamonds. No one throws them away. But whether plastic should be or tin cans should be or not is very different. Another benefit of the market is, it used to be that frozen orange juice things would come in a little thing that have tin, you'd have cardboard, you'd have plastic. Now it's all plastic because it's easier to dispose of it, and you would have more of that if you had a market in solid waste management than not. Okay, so much for hazardous waste, plastic. One other point I wanted to mention is the issue of diapers. Which is more environmentally sound, plastic diapers or cloth diapers? This is a problem that many of you people in 5 years will be facing when you have your children. And the answer is we can't answer it because we don't have market prices, because water is publicly owned. You see, the advantage of cloth diapers is you can recycle them. But you get dirty water, and you have to use water, and then you have to dispose of them through the water system, and we don't have separate prices for doing that. The advantages of plastic diapers is they're much more convenient, but now you have solid landfill, but you don't have prices for that either. So again, we are faced in the environmental context with the problem that Mises addressed in the overall problem of central planning. The correct answer to the question, which is more environmentally sound, paper or cloth or plastic diapers, is we don't know, we can't tell because we don't have prices. You need cardinal prices, you need an accounting system. We don't have it because the government has socialism and gets involved in water. So in order to solve this problem, we need to have privatized water, which we don't have, so we really can't address the problem. Okay, the next issue is running out of resources, forests, other things like that. Again, Alfred Marshall says that we have market failure. People don't look into the future. People look into the future a lot better than governments do. The government's visage is 4 years, whereas people have much more of a time horizon than that. One of the problems with running out of resources is the Brazilian rainforest. What's going on there is that Brazil and Argentina are having a macho kind of a thing as who's number one in cattle raising, and Argentina was whooping them. So the Brazilian government started subsidizing farmers to cut down the Brazilian rainforest to get cattle areas in Brazil. There was this wonderful movie, Medicine Man, with Sean Connery. Anyone see that? Mm-hmm. And what they discovered, Sean Connery and this beautiful young girl from the Bronx with a great accent, discovered that there was some critter, a bug or something that would cure cancer, I think it was. I'm sorry? A flower that would cure cancer. And needless to say, the capitalists were cutting down the rainforest. Now, this doesn't sound like any capitalist I know. I mean, a capitalist who thought that there was a cure for cancer in the Brazilian rainforest, that would end cattle ranching there, and they would, pretty much try to get that because, what's a cow worth? Big deal. But to cure cancer, you can make zillions. So the whole movie was, when you watch these movies like West Wing or these kind of movies, you sort of have to suspend your judgment because if you keep your brain about it, you say, oh, that's nonsense, and you can't enjoy it. You have to sort of get into the socialist liberal Weltanschauung to enjoy it. Okay, what else is going on with running out of resources? There's this group called the Club of Rome, and what the Club of Rome is always doing is predicting that in the next 10 years we're going to run out of whatever it is. And the way they go is they say, okay, look, we have reserves of whatever is 400 tons, 400 something. We're using 10 per year. Therefore, in 40 years, we'll run out of it. That's the level of their analysis. They get millions of dollars. They get a lot of publicity. This is the big thing. And what they forget about is that as we start running out of stuff, what happens to the price? The price rises. And when the price rises, people are led by an invisible hand to economize it and use alternative sources and maybe manufactured sources or what have you. And also other people are led as if by an invisible hand to go discover more of it. So what they find out, there's this guy, Lomborg, who just wrote a book, The Skeptical Environmentalist, who says, look, we're not running out of anything. There was this wonderful bet between Julian Simon and Paul Ehrlich, who won the Genius Award for something or other. There's a Genius Award for lefties, lefty geniuses. And they had this bet 30, 40 years ago as to whether we'd be running out of stuff, and they decided that the way to settle the bet is that if the prices of the thing rose, relative prices rose, then we were running out of it, and if it fell, we weren't. Julian Simon won, I think, $10,000 from him. And then Ehrlich proposed a new bet. He said, well, let's bet that in 20 years we'll run out of fish. And Simon said, not just natural fish, but farm fish too. And Ehrlich wouldn't take that bet. He learned something. So we're not running out of resources because the market again comes to the rescue. Anytime there's any incipient tendency to run out of resources, we start using other resources, substitutes. People invent substitutes for it, or they find more of it. We're just not running out of resources. The Earth is, what's the diameter of it? 7,000 miles, I think. It's just a solid ball of resources. The only resources we've ever lost so far is a puny amount that we sent off to Mars. The rest, the resources are still here. So it's silly to think we're running out of resources. Okay, let me now talk about species extinction. Now, there's another movie called Dances with Wolves. Very good movie, I mean, if you suspend your critical faculties. Kevin Costner's, good guy, and he's on the side of the Indians, and the whites are all evil. And you have this wonderful scene where a whole bunch of buffalo were just slaughtered, and what they would do is take their tongues, which was a delicacy, or their livers, and then they leave the rest of the carcass. Whereas the Indians, were saying, oh, look at the horrible white man. The truth of the matter is what the Indians used to do is run these buffalo off a cliff and just do the same thing, but they didn't show that in the movie. What you have here is the tragedy of the commons. And the best way to illustrate the tragedy of the commons is to compare the buffalo and the cow. Why is it that the cow never came within 1 million miles of extinction and the buffalo almost did? And this is strange because if you look at the two animals, they're really the same. Now here is my depiction of the cow. And the cow is smiling because he's not becoming extinct. And here is the buffalo, and the buffalo is unhappy because he's extinct. It's the same animal. If you crash into one of them, you're in trouble. They both moo, they both give milk, they're both hairy and disgusting animals, and you can make burgers out of either of them. They're the same animal biologically. Don't confuse me if there's a biologist, maybe there's a different species or different genus, I don't know from that. All I know is a dumb economist, they're about the same thing. Why is it that one is extinct, or almost in danger of extinction, and the other isn't? Well, the answer is private property rights. The cow has always been owned privately. No farmer goes into the lower 40 with a machine gun and starts shooting all of his cows. Why doesn't he do that? Because if he does it, he won't have the cow tomorrow. The cost of killing a cow today is a cow tomorrow, and a cow tomorrow is a high alternative cost. But when buffalo were unowned and they were just running around like Meshuggahs, crazy creatures, we couldn't keep track of them. What was the cost of shooting a buffalo? Was the cost of shooting a buffalo today a buffalo tomorrow? No. The cost of shooting a buffalo today wasn't a buffalo tomorrow. The cost of shooting a buffalo today was nothing, because the buffalo would be over the horizon. So of course you're going to shoot it today, even if you don't value it very much. You see a constant refrain between plastics and buffalo and alternative costs and market failure. It's the same lesson, just in a different example. There's this guy, Daniel Arap Moi, who is isn't there a kid from Kenya? Who is Daniel Arap Moi? He was the former president of Kenya. He once burned $3 million worth of tusks of elephants, and it was on the Newsweek magazine, and he was doing this in protest of the extinction of the elephant. Well, look, as far as I'm concerned, an elephant is just a big cow with funny-looking ears and a funny-looking snout. Here's the snout. And there's an elephant. It's the same thing. They're just a little bit bigger with funny ears, and they go, and, you know, instead of moo or something. The way to save the, you know, what the lefties say is that the reason that the elephant is going extinct is because the value of its tusks, I think it's like $100 per pound. And the rhino, which is, you know, a different funny-looking nose, its tusk is worth $100 an ounce for various medicinal reasons or sexual. It's supposed to be aphrodisiac. So anyway, the reason that they say these animals are going extinct is because they're very valuable. But that's the exact opposite of the truth. See, if an animal is valuable, then it pays for us to keep it alive. The real animal, the real danger of extinction is not animals that are so valuable. The reason they're going extinct is because they're not owned, and we have no incentives to keep them alive. If you had elephant farms or rhino farms, and it used to be prohibited because they were extinct, get that? If we had those farms, we'd be saving them. The alligators or the crocodiles, I always mix those two up. I can never tell. I show my environmental class. Some of the kids here will be taking it. You'll be seeing this film about either the crocodile or the alligator, which used to be on the verge of extinction, and the lefties would say don't use belts or handbags for women made out of this stuff. And they were going extinct because they were, you know, not allowed to be owned. But then they changed the rule, and now you could have alligator farms. And they feed them nutria, and they feed them this and that, and now we're up to our armpits in alligators, so to speak. It's a commercial activity. You see, in the wild, an alligator will have, I don't know, 500 eggs, and 2 or 3 of them will survive. In the farming, they'll have 500 eggs, and 495 will survive because they take care of them. When you own it, you take care of it. When you don't own it, you don't. So the way, the real animals that are in danger of extinction are the creepy, crawly, disgusting animals, worms and spiders and stuff like that. Who would keep, the animals that maybe will cure cancer one day? Who would keep animals like that alive in the free enterprise system? Biology departments in universities, pharmaceutical companies, who might like to keep a shelf of creepy, crawly animals for the future in case maybe they'll be of some use. The other movie that comes into play here with animal extinction is the Star Trek movie. Remember when the boys went back to the present day from the year 2300? Why? Because there were these super duper guys that didn't like the fact that the whales were extinct. Come on, aren't you people with this stuff? Right. So they had to go get a whale to bring to the future so that the super duper guys would you know, get off their case. Well, it's the same thing with the whales. The whales are just elephants with fins.
Can you draw one?
You want? She's just bugging me. She wanted me to. You want to see me draw a whale, do you?
Let's see it.
Too bad. Suffer. If we had private property in the oceans and the whales were so expensive, they wouldn't be overhunted. I mean, the reason they're overhunted now is that if you let one escape, do you have one tomorrow? No. They go off somewhere. Look, these whales, we're now in the hunting and gathering stages on the ocean compared to farming. We should be farming these whales. The problem with farming big guys like elephants is you need thick electronic fences. I mean, the barbed wire won't bother any of you. They go right through barbed wire. The barbed wire would stop the cows. But before we had barbed wire, we had brands were fences, or cowboys were human fences. See, the problem in the oceans is not any different than the problem on land. It's to fence these guys in. It's to impose our will on them, to farm them, save their lives. I mean, if you look at it from the point of, if you were the god of sheep, would you rather be running loose or be domesticated? Well, there'd be more sheep if human beings have an incentive to take care of them, rather than if they hunt them down because of the tragedy of the commons. Okay, let me move on now. Talk a little bit about oil spills. The Yucatan in 1979 off Mexico, 155 million gallons. The Amoco Cadiz, 68 million gallons off the coast of France. The Exxon Valdez, only 10 million gallons, but that occurred to us, so that was a bigger deal off Alaska. By the way, with the Exxon Valdez, what happened was that they were right near the coast where it's more dangerous. Like if you're in the middle of the ocean, it's easier to operate. So you could have a relatively unqualified third mate do it. But when you get close to the ocean, to the shore, you need somebody who's really up there. But this guy, the captain, was drunk. So either he didn't do a good job or he had his assistant do it. Now you might ask yourselves, what the hell is a drunk guy doing in a big tanker with 10 millions of gallons of oil? Is this market failure? No, because we have Americans with Disabilities Act. You can't fire drunken. I don't know why they don't do it with airlines. I mean, if they were consistent, you'd have drunken pilots and pilots who are 90 years old because you can't discriminate against age. Thank God you had some sense in airlines. Otherwise, you know, we'd all be killed in airlines. But the cause of this, again, was not a market. It was government. Boo, boo. If oceans were privately owned, it would be sort of like roads were privately owned. You would charge more for a ship with a drunken captain, or you wouldn't let him in your patch of the ocean at all because you know that if he dropped oil in your area and it went to somebody else's area, they'd sue you. So you would have an incentive to make sure not only that your part is clean, but that oil doesn't come from your part to the other part. Yeah?
Doesn't that make it extremely difficult for any, I mean, if you've got, say you've divided the ocean up into shares, certain people own certain shares of this stretch of water, then you'd have to build various ports all the way through to ensure that somebody was there. How would that work? Obstructing trade to the extent that it didn't happen anymore.
Well, I think it's the same problem on water as land. I mean, to me, water is just more movable land. You have on land, you have the Mississippi changing its course. You know, sometimes it's here, sometimes it's there. You have mudslides. Land is just more solid water. Water is just less solid land. The economics of it, it's a continuum. So any problem that you have on the water, there's an analog on the land. And we know that in the Soviet collectivized farms, what was it? The Soviet collectivized farms were 97% of the area, and they accounted for, what was it, 75% of the crops, whereas the privately owned part of the land was 3%, and it accounted for 25% of the crops. So you can see this wild difference between privately owned land and publicly owned land, because the incentives were very different. Well, it's the same thing on the ocean. When it's publicly owned or non-owned, it's economically dissipated. When it's privately owned, people take care of it and work well with it. Okay, with regard to the greenhouse and the ozone layer and global warming, where is my... Let me just show you a few things about whether we have global warming or not. Here is a picture of temperatures between 1860 and 1980, 120 years, and this is 1 degree centigrade. So you can see there's practically no movement. The trend, the one is land and the other is water. It's about the same. Here's another one from 1895 to 1985, U.S. temperatures, also 1 degree here. It's pretty flat. Here is a much more long-run view. What am I doing wrong? This one?
Yeah.
Ah, there we go. Here is a much more long-run view. The top one goes back 800,000 years. You can see ice ages, and we're at a blip, but it's hard to see global warming there. Over here, in the bottom one, is a smaller amount, just 20,000 years. And you can see the ice age and the non-ice age over here. So we're now in a non-ice age area. Again, it's hard to see what the lefties are all screaming about. You know, maybe it's in there, but it's hard to see it. And here is a different time dimension. The Little Ice Age, when Greenland was, I mean, why do they call it Greenland? They should call it White Land, I guess. But in those days, it was green. Well, here is a picture of about 1,000 years. And again, it's hard to see it. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. The idea here on the part of the critics is two things. One, that we're having global warming, which is hard to see. And two, that the global warming is due to man's technology. So you get into Ludditism, you know, we shouldn't have any machines, we shouldn't be burning oil or nukes or whatever because we're heating it all up. It's hard to see. But what they do is they focus on only one way of the human race going under, through messing our nest. But there's another way that the human race can go under, and that's meteors. They say that, I don't know whether this is true or not, but that the dinosaurs became extinct because of a 6-mile wide meteor that landed in the Gulf of Mexico and created a tidal wave, and somehow all the dinosaurs went. I don't know if that's true or not, but there are bigger meteors than that, and it's possible that a big one will get us. But if so, then the way to go is not anti-technology, but pro-technology. What we need is the technology. Maybe in 200 years there'll be a meteor that will end the Earth. Well, if so, we need the technology to go up to it while it's near Jupiter and either bomb the hell out of it or put space sails on it or something, I don't know, to divert it from Earth. So what I'm trying to say is that, first of all, it's unclear that we are poisoning our own nest with global warming. Secondly, or rather it's unclear that it is happening. Secondly, it's very unclear that we're doing it, even if it is happening. And thirdly, that's not the only danger to the human race. If you want to take a real long-run view, the danger to the human race is that one day the sun will go out. It's supposed to be in some billions of years from now. I'm taking the long-run view. And in those billions of years, not only should we be able to colonize Jupiter and Neptune and Saturn, but we're going to have to get to other solar systems if the human race, to which I'm very partial, is going to survive. So this indicates not, what is it, the ostrich putting its head in the sand and becoming a Luddite, destroying machines, but the very opposite. Now, machines don't mean pollution. Machines and technology only mean pollution if, as I mentioned at the beginning of the hour, we don't uphold private property rights and stop trespass. Let me talk about one other area. The next and last topic I'll cover is overpopulation. Before I do, let me just mention environmental racism. There's this new thing that we locate bad things in black areas. Not really true. Rather, we locate bad things in poor areas, and there's a high correlation between being black and being poor. So it works out that way, but it's got nothing to do with racism. It's got all to do with economics. And it's not just that we locate bad things in poor areas. Rather, it's that poor people come to areas where bad things are first located. You get that? Why is that? Suppose I open up an area where I put bad things in it. What will happen to the property values for residential housing? Down. Well, who is going to naturally gravitate toward cheap land values? Poor people. I mean, this is a nature, the very essence of economics is that rich people will go to nicer places. I mean, what's the point of being rich if you can't do things like that? Right? So if you attack that, you're really attacking income divergences. And if you attack economic divergences, you might as well attack all incentives to produce anything. Let's talk a little bit about overpopulation. Okay, what's going on here? According to Ehrlich and the boys, Lester Brown and the left-wing environmentalists, we're going to just have so many population, so many people. This is highly problematic. First of all, let me give you some evidence on this. First, the Earth is empty. You take an airplane, especially west of the Mississippi, but even east of the Mississippi, and you go at night when you can see the little lights and look down at 30,000 feet, the place is empty. West of the Mississippi, there's nothing there. No one lives west of the Mississippi. Don't tell me about Denver. I don't want to hear about it. There's no people there. Even east of the Mississippi, you see a little light. Okay, well, that's Chicago. Or, you see another light, and that's Atlanta. The place is empty. Thomas Sowell, someone said that they're an admirer of Walter Williams. Well, Thomas Sowell is sort of Walter Williams' guru. Thomas Sowell has this thing where if you put the entire world's population in the form of middle-class housing is 8,200 square feet per family of 4, front yard, backyard, and a house of 2,500 square feet. If you put everyone, all 6 billion people, in housing like that, do you know what size of area you could put them all into? Texas. Someone's been cheating, reading this stuff. In my day, nowadays what you young kids do, I understand, is you go to these discotheques or something, and you all stand up there, and somebody gets on top of you, and you sort of move them around with your hands, right? What's that called?
Crowd surfing.
What?
Crowd surfing.
Crowd surfing. In my day, it was telephone booth stuffing. Nowadays you don't have telephone booths. You have these little handheld things. But in my day, you had a telephone booth. A telephone booth was maybe this wide and this deep and maybe this high, and you try to stuff in 10, 15 people in there. Gets a little crowded. Think sardines. Suppose all 6 billion of us were in a telephone booth. What are the dimensions of the telephone booth that all 6 billion of us could fit in? A mile cubic. A mile high, a mile deep, a mile wide. All 6 billion people could get in there. Now, it would be a little crowded, I admit it. And the air would start, it wouldn't be too good after about 5 seconds. But still, to give you an indication of how few people we have, a mile cubic of people. And we've got a whole Earth. Another indication of this is something I get from Thomas Sowell, and what he says is, look, if overpopulation is bad, then countries that are overpopulated now compared to their square mileage, namely you have a high, population density, ought to be very poor. And empty countries ought to be very rich. You get it? So what he did is he made a list of all the countries, and he ranked them by population per square mile, and also by wealth. Right? Namely, what you ought to get if the overpopulationists were correct is a supply curve. You ought to get rich countries that are underpopulated, and poor countries that are heavily populated. You only ought to have countries like this. But instead, he shows you have countries all over the lot. Therefore, he deduces from that there is no correlation between population density and wealth. The real correlation between wealth and anything is economic freedom and wealth, or IQ and wealth. That's a different kind of an issue. Let me end with a debating ploy that I once pulled on someone, and it was a very hostile audience, so it didn't go too well, but I'm sure it'll go better here. I was debating somebody, and I just finished my discussion, similar to this, and I said, here is my opponent. He's going to come on stage soon, and one of the things he's going to say is that we have too many people. He, if he says that, will be committing a performative contradiction, similar to the one that Hans Hoppe talks about aggression in his argument from argument. Because he is going to be saying we have too many people. Yet he has it within his power to reduce the size of the population by 1. The fact that he hasn't done it shows he doesn't believe in his own stupid theory. And then I got off the stage and everyone booed.